On behalf of Akuno Senko for Bay, you know what I'm saying? Jay, where you at? We're trying to help our people elevate. Hope. H-O-P-E. We're giving them hope. We doing what we gotta do, you know? Every day, one step at a time, man. We gonna make it happen. Helping our people elevate. Yeah. Sometimes I practice focus, thought, and meditate. I'm trying to come with other ways to help our people elevate. And seeking knowledge make me levitate. The lifted mental state is what results from how we orchestrate. This for the family's sake. Let's self-reflect and self-evaluate. And every day, make sure the steps you take, you calculate. Receive a master's fate. I know I can't exist without the hate, but that's okay. I balance that with higher self today. Success is on this way, and after that, my flesh can pass away.
Peace, family. It's your boy Akuno Senko for Bay. I'm back with another one. We're going to go ahead and discuss some of the melanated towns that existed from the 1800s or late 1800s to the early 1900s before the Great Depression of the 1930s. And then I also want you to think while I'm going over these cities and towns, and I'm going to ask you again, why did Dr. King not push rebuilding of these towns? Why did he push or promote integrating and building with these people versus us rebuilding our own cities? And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to give you I have a list of quite a few, at least 20, and I know there's a way more than what I'm going to give you, but I'm going to give you a list of some of the so-called black towns or cities that existed prior to the Great Depression or before the Great Depression. And so without further ado, before I get started, if you haven't, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, leave a comment, ask questions. Do not be afraid to ask questions. I may not have all the answers, but I don't have a problem with responding, researching, getting back with you. Or if I got the answer, I can get back with you at the spot. But from here, I want to jump straight into it. And I want to start with the La Villa in Jacksonville, Florida. The rise and fall of a great black neighborhood. And so this here is a depiction or a picture of what Jacksonville, Florida, or La Villa, Florida looked like at the time during this all-black, quote-unquote, all-black town. Jacksonville, Florida. In 1866, Francis L. Ingle purchased and subdivides land in the area, forming the town of La Villa. L. Ingle becomes La Villa's first mayor. In 1869. I have so many dates, so much history in my mind, so forgive me for that. In 1869, Patrick H. Chappelle is born in Jacksonville. Chappelle dominated the entertainment profession in the southeastern United States for most of the first decade of the 20th century and was one of the most intriguing entrepreneurs of his time. This was the Cooksman Institute and the Florida Archives, Florida Memory, in the 1870s. In 1870, 70% of La Villa's population was comprised of African Americans, many of whom worked in Jacksonville's booming hotel, lumber, port, building, and railroad industries. Early businesses included the Bain and Washington Lumber Dealership, the El Modelo Cigar Factory, the Bergner and Ingle Brewing Company, the Refrigerated Ice Works, Carriage Works, and Beef Dressing Works. In 1871, James Weldon Johnson is born in Jacksonville on June 17, 1871. 1872, the Cooksman Institute, established and supported by the Freedmen's Aid and Southern Education Society of the Methodist Episcopal Church. In 1876, Eartha M.M. White, born in Jacksonville, White was the 13th child of a former slave. This here is a picture of Henry Plant from the 1880s. In 81, Henry Plant opens the Waycross short line, making direct rail travel from the north possible. La Villa in 1887, La Villa is annexed by the city of Jacksonville. 3,000 people lived in La Villa at this time. So this is a little bit of history of the brothers and some of the things that took place in La Villa. But I just want to give y'all an example of this town that many may not have known about, that was founded by our brother, La Villa, Jacksonville, Florida. Then I want to go into DeWitt, Nebraska. Also, Arcadius, known as Arcadius, Nebraska, of 1908. And what I didn't mention was that I did mention that La Villa was purchased, or Florida, 1887. So in 1887, you have La Villa, Jacksonville, Florida. And in 1908, you have DeWitt, Nebraska. It says right here, oh, in this photo, these were members of the church in DeWitt, of the St. James African Church. DeWitt grew to be the most populous, long-lived, and successful settlement of Black homesteads in Nebraska. DeWitt was a homestead colony in Cherry County, Nebraska, located 10 miles northwest of Brownlee. The community began forming in 1904 with the Kincaid Act. This act expanded the Homestead Act, allowing individuals to claim 640 acres of land in Nebraska sandhills. Now, what I want to say is that I touched on the Homestead Act, or the homesteaders, in my Boomer Sooner video. So if you don't know what the homesteaders are, go to that Boomer Sooner video, and you'll be familiar with the Homestead Act, and to give you more in depth of what homesteader or homestead was. It says 11 settlers filed homestead claims in 1907, 3 more in 1908, 6 by 1909, and 6 in 1910, and 11 in 1911. Between 1904 and 1911, 43 entries were made. Many were along both sides of the North Loop River. In 1929, DeWitt residents had claimed 65 of 56 homesteads for 29,402 acres. The total number of Black people who at some point lived in DeWitt was between 150 and 175. DeWitt reached its population peak of about 150 residents in 1915. In 1912, Miles H. DeWitt established and operated the first post office and ran a small store. DeWitt's family were closely connected to the residents and other Black homesteading communities. For example, Charles and Rosetta Spease left Empire, Wyoming in 1920 to settle near relatives in DeWitt. And so here you have an image of Charles and his wife. Well, they were Rosetta. This is a picture from their wedding day in 1907. DeWitt parents placed a high priority education on their children. They established several school districts in areas where there were no white settlers. One included both white and Black children. Most of the teachers were drawn from DeWitt itself. One of those teachers was Pearlie Woodson. They don't have it. What I want to show y'all here is Pearlie Woodson's homestead entry. As you'll see, the U.S. Land Office, Valentine, Nebraska. This is her roll number. This is her receipt number. What is your full name, age, and post office address? And it says right here her name, her age. She was 26, and where she was from or lived in Nebraska, her current address. Most of DeWitty's social life revolved around the St. James African Methodist Episcopal Church, built in 1910. The residents also cultivated other important culture, civic, and leisure pastimes. They participated in baseball, singing groups, reading circles, and so on. The first Sunday in August was reserved for a big celebration and picnic for the DeWitty colony. The celebration featuring speeches, food, games, and sometimes a rodeo. DeWitty, renamed Audacious, ultimately disappeared. DeWitty had prospered during the 1900s and 1910s. These were wetter years and had relatively high crop prices. Prices were even higher during the war years. But starting in 1921, dire times returned and crop prices fell drastically. When the stock markets crashed and the long drought in the 1930s arrived, DeWitty farmers could not survive. DeWitty homesteaders found the Nebraska sandhills to be a tough place to succeed at farming with poor soil qualities. They borrowed where they could, mortgaging their land, but eventually sold to adjoining ranchers. And so by 1936, all the settlers had sold their land to ranchers and moved away. The last original parcel sold to outside hands in 1920 or 1990s. In 2006, the Nebraska State Historical Society installed a historical marker to commemorate the DeWitty settlement. Today, the descendants of the DeWitty preserve their history in this community. And so, DeWitty, Nebraska, which was, as stated, found by this brother here in the middle picture, as you saw. Took place in 1904, 1908, as they say, but my research said, 1904. So let's go to the next one. Now I want to go into Allensworth, California. Many of you probably never heard of Allensworth, California. Well, Allen Allensworth was born into slavery in Louisville, Kentucky in 1842. At the age of 12, he was sold downriver for trying to learn how to read and write. After some trading by slave dealers, he was taken to New Orleans and bought by a slaveholder to become a jockey. The Civil War started, and when the Union forces neared Louisville, Allensworth found his chance for freedom. He joined the Navy, and when he was discharged, he had achieved the rank of first-class petty officer. In 1871, he was ordained as a Baptist minister and entered the Baptist Theological Institute in Nashville. While serving at the Union Baptist Church in Cincinnati, he learned of the need for African-American chaplains in the armed services and got an appointment as chaplain of the 24th Infantry. He had seen many African Americans move west after the Civil War to escape discrimination. With 4 other men with similar visions, Allensworth decided to establish a place where African Americans could live and thrive without oppression. On June 30th, 1908, they formed the California Colony Home Promoting Association. They selected an area in Tulare County because it was fertile. There was plenty of water and the land was available and inexpensive. They first bought 20 acres and later 180 more. The little town with a big vision grew rapidly for several years to more than 200 inhabitants by 1914. The same year, Allensworth became a voting precinct and a judicial district. Colonel Allensworth was killed on September 14, 1914, when hit by a motorcycle while getting off a streetcar in Monrovia. After a funeral at the Second Baptist Church in Los Angeles, he was buried with full military honors. Since most of the water of Allensworth farming had to come underground from the Sierra Nevada mountains, and there were many other farms and communities between the mountains and Allensworth, the water supply for the town and farmers began to dry up. The next blow was the Great Depression that hit the whole country in the early 1930s. Public services began to shut down, and many residents moved to the cities to look for work. The post office closed in 1931. By 1940, most of the residents were migratory farm workers, and the population was mainly a mixture of Blacks and Hispanics. Housing deteriorated as most of the people didn't consider Allensworth their permanent home. The population had shrunk to 90 in 1972 and later dropped to almost zero. And I just want to say, right here where it says in the 1940s, most of the residents were a mixture of Blacks and Hispanics. And so the quote unquote Black and brown, well, so-called Black and Mexicans, we've been here. We were always here. I want to put that out there. We are the indigenous Aboriginal people of this soil. It was the colonizers who came and messed all it up and told us go back to Africa and told them to go to New Mexico. Well, where's Old Mexico? We'll get into that in another video. A drive began in the early 1970s to save the town of Allensworth. Allensworth will be a historical monument and public park dedicated to the memory and spirit of Colonel Allensworth, as well as a place to note the achievements and contributions of African Americans to the history and development of California in 1974. When the town site became a state historical park, restorations began, and plans began to further preservations, restorations, and reconstructions for interpretations of the history of Allensworth. And so, again, Allensworth, California, was established 1904, 1908. And so I'm giving you a history from the late 1800s, and we into the early 1900s, of these melanated towns of our people. And so next we're going to go into Eatonville, Florida of 1887. These were city council members in the jail of Eatonville, Florida in 1907. And so you see we had our own laws, or not law, but we had our own court system. We had our own city council members, I should say, and we had our own jails. It says that Eatonville was the first all-Black city to be incorporated in Florida. Eatonville was established in 1887 after being settled 2 decades after the Civil War ended by former slaves. Located 6 miles north of Orlando, the town was first named Maitland and got its start from when former slave Joseph C. Clark, along with Northern philanthropist Louis Lawrence, bought over 100 acres of land from Josiah Eaton, one of the few white landowners willing to sell to African Americans. Then they parceled the acres to Black communities, Black families from the surrounding areas of Central Florida. On the 15th of August, 1887, the town was officially incorporated with 27 registered Black voters indicated their intention to create a municipality. They named the town in honor of Josiah Eaton, who eventually also served as its mayor. The new town citizens, however, chose Columbus H. Boger as its first mayor to head the entirely Black staffed government. Okay. Again, we had our own Black government. The life of Eatonville, like other all-Black towns in the Black sections of mostly white communities, revolved around its church and its schools. The St. Lawrence African Methodist Episcopal Church, AME, then simply called the Methodist Church, was the first religious institution in the city. The church received the first 10 acres of land purchased by Clark and Lawrence, and upon its founding in 1881, predating the town by 6 years, it became the first African-American church in the area. St. Lawrence AME still stands in Eatonville and continues to serve the community on this day. Along with St. Lawrence AME, the town's first post-primary school, the Hungerford Normal and its industrial school, was central to the town's culture. The school, which was founded by Professor and Miss Russell C. Calhoun in 1889, sat on the land that was donated in the memory of Dr. Robert Hungerford, a white doctor who had died while caring for sick African Americans. The Hungerford School, headed by Tuskegee Institute graduates, the Calhoun was modeled on Tuskegee principles, teaching vocational literacy and life skills to African Americans in Central Florida. Eatonville is best known, however, for its most famous daughter, Zora Neale Hurston. Her preacher father, John Hurston, who would become the town's mayor in 1897, had moved with his family to the town in 1894 when Zora was 3. Although born in Nottasulga, Alabama, she always considered Eatonville her home. This is the Zora Neale. Beautiful sister. She was a writer, anthropologist from the New Harlem, New York, Renaissance Civil Rights era. She settled in Baltimore, Maryland, completed her education at Morgan Academy and Howard University. Okay, so Hurston's experience growing up in Eatonville, largely independent of white influences, would come to shape her writing style. And the town was featured in much of her work, notably the 1928 essay, How It Feels to Be Colored Me, and her 1937 novel, Their Eyes Were Watching God. In 1990, the town established the Zora Neale Hurston Museum of Fine Arts. Now Eatonville holds an annual Zora Festival, a nearly month-long celebration of the arts and the humanities in January. The festival, which draws over 100,000 visitors to the small town, whose permanent population in 2010 was 2,159, has featured presentations from university professors, exhibitions of local artists, and performances by big-name musicians, including the Isley Brothers and Lyfe Jennings. In 2010, 90% of the residents were African Americans, 7% were white, and the rest were Latino, Asian, and Native Americans. And so, giving you another timestamp of Eatonville, Florida in 1887. Now I want to go into Whitesboro, New Jersey, established in 1902. Right, Whitesboro, New Jersey. It says Whitesboro, New Jersey was established in 1902 as a town exclusively for African Americans. The idea came in response to increasing white residents The idea came in response to increasing white resistance to Black residents in Cape May County, New Jersey. The African American Equitable Industrial Association, founded by Reverend J.W. Fishburne and 4 other members of Cape May City AME Zion Church, purchased the land in an effort inspired by the self-help philosophy of Booker T. Washington. With help of many investors from the South, most notably the George H. Whiteland Improvement Company, the association purchased 2,000 acres of land, approximately 10 miles north of Cape May City, for $14,000. In December of 1901, 4 months after the purchase was finalized, advertisements began appearing for the sale of the lots in magazines such as Colored Americans. Prospective colonists had to be of good character and in the spirit of Washington needed to possess steady and industrious habits. Once approved, the colonists would receive a number of lots, each 50 by 150 feet, about 1/6 of an acre, for a down payment of $5 per lot, and they promised to till the land. The residents were under no obligations to build a home or any other structure on their lot, but the land was promised to be good and growing farm produce. The land was promised to be good for growing farm produce and raising chickens, so building homes was encouraged. Colonists had 10 years to pay off their initial purchase price of $50 and were charged an additional $2 to $5 a month, depending on their income. Relatively few of the first colonists were actually from New Jersey, as the Equitable Association had hoped. Most of them were migrants from Virginia or North Carolina, where the name George White was familiar. In March 1902, the town named itself Whitesboro after its most famous investor, George White, who, when his term ended in 1901, was the last Black congressional representative until 1929. And so George White was a brother who was in office, who was a part of governmental office, and they named the town after him, Whitesboro. And so now I want to go into Highland Beach, Maryland of 1893. And this is a photo of the Highland Beach goers in Maryland during that time. These people they were on the beach. Highland Beach, Maryland is the oldest of the major Black resort towns that was founded along in the western shores of the Chesapeake Bay in 1893 by Charles and Laura Douglas. Charles Douglas was the son of a prominent abolitionist and 19th century civil rights activist Frederick Douglass. See, I learned something new. So Highland Beach was founded by Charles Douglas, which is the son of Frederick Douglass. Learned something new. Major Charles Douglas, however, was prominent in his own rights. He was a retired officer formerly with the 54th Massachusetts Colored Infantry, the first Black regiment established during the American Civil War, and a longtime Treasury Department clerk. Located in Anne Arundel County, 35 miles east of Washington, D.C., and a few miles south of Indianapolis, Maryland, Highland Beach became the first African-American-owned summer resort community in the United States. In fact, it was established because of an act of racial discrimination. In 1890, Mayor Douglas and his wife were denied entry into a restaurant at the Bay Bridge Resort on Chesapeake Bay because they were African-American. In response, Douglas entered the real estate business and began purchasing beachfront property directly south of Bay Ridge. After he acquired slightly more than 40 acres for $5,000, he began developing the property as a summer resort community by selling lots to families and friends. Among the earliest purchasers were Blanche K. Bruce, the Reconstruction era U.S. Senator from Mississippi, former Virginia Congressman John Mercer Langston, former Louisiana Governor PBS Pinchback, Washington Hotel owner James Wormley, and Judge Robert Terrell and his wife Mary Church Terrell. Robert Terrell was the first Black judge in the District of Columbia. And so, as it stated right here, after he required slightly more than 40 acres for 5,000, he began developing the property. And the result for communities and earliest purchasers were this brother here, Blanche K. Bruce. I may be saying his name wrong. John Mercer Langston. This brother right here. Professor Langston, let me say that. You have the judge. Also, to the youngsters, anybody that may catch this should be encouragement to let you know that you can be whatever you want to be. We can create whatever we want. Everything that we complain we don't have in our community, they had it. So why is it that we don't have it? They had common unity to build a community. So what are we missing in why don't we have this common unity to build our communities? And then his wife, Mary Church Terrell, right? This sister right here. She almost like the sister from Hidden and Living Colors, but we ain't gonna get into that. It say Robert Terrell was the first Black judge in the District of Columbia. And so this is the first judge in Columbia. That's an accomplishment. That's an achievement. That's great. Charles Douglas also began building a large family summer house, which he named Twin Oaks, intended primarily as a retirement residence for his father. Twin Oaks soon became a gathering place for many influential African Americans who lived in the Washington, Baltimore area, but who visited Frederick Douglass there. Although Frederick Douglass died before he could move into the house permanently, Highland Beach, as a surrounding community, was now called, quickly became popular with prominent African Americans. Part-time residents and guests over the years included a who's who of Black Americans who included Paul Robertson, Booker T. Washington, W.E.B. Du Bois, Langston Hughes, Robert Weavers, and Alex Haley. All right, so it says Charles Douglas claimed his greatest success in establishing Highland Beach was in circumventing restrictive property covenants in the area that prevented the sale of real estate to Blacks and other people of color. Originally intended as a summer resort, by 1915, Highland Beach was a year-round community with many houses and properties still retained by descendants of the original owners. When founder Charles Douglas died in 1920, the town's leadership fell into the hands of his son, Haley Douglas, who in 1922 led the efforts to make Highland Beach the first African-American incorporated municipality in the state's history. Once incorporated, Douglas and his allies controlled the community for the next 3 decades and succeeded in their major objectives, ensuring that the communities remained small and exclusive. So that gives you, like I said, we just went over Highland Beach, Maryland, which is founded by Charles Douglas, who was the son of Frederick Douglass. Now I want to go into Weeksville, New York. I'm sure by now some of these places you may have heard of, some of them you may have not heard of. But we're going to keep getting into it. So Weeksville, New York, 1838. Weeksville was a 19th century free Black community located in what is now the Bedford-Stuyvesant area of Brooklyn, New York. It is remembered today as a historical site for its community programs, urban employment opportunities, and the promotion of racial respectability. In 1838, only 11 years after slavery ended in New York, Weeksville was formed by a free Black man named James Weeks when he purchased a substantial area of the land from Henry C. Thompson, another free Black man. Weeks then encouraged other Blacks to settle on the property as he sold lots to the new owners, who named the community Weeksville. Weeksville quickly became a self-sufficient and thriving free Black community. It also became a refuge for Southern Blacks fleeing slavery and for Northern Blacks who desired to escape racial violence and draft riots in New York and other cities. By 1850, it was the second largest community for free Blacks in pre-Civil War America. The second largest city, 1850s. The community was known for employing Blacks in urban occupations, and it was a community where Black doctors, professionals, and entrepreneurs were able to practice skills and develop clientele. Weeksville residents established churches, schools, benevolence associations, and elderly homes, and had an orphanage by 1860s. In addition to housing a variety of Black-owned businesses, Weeksville saw the creation of the Freedmen's Torchlight, of one of the country's first African-American newspapers. So the Freedmen's Torchlight was one of the first African-American newspapers. Weeksville not only provided opportunities for Blacks to obtain entrepreneurial success, but also offered political and intellectual freedom and was a site for abolitionist actions. Community members participated in a wide range of anti-slavery action and promoted the equal rights for free Blacks, including the voting rights campaign, the Black Conventions movement, the resistance of the 1863 New York City draft riots. After the Civil War, it encouraged freedmen schools in the South and supporting Black nationalist aspirations across the North. By the post-Civil War era, Weeksville had become an emblem of community empowerment and racial pride. By 1900, the community was home of over 500 families comprised of doctors, ministries, tradesmen, teachers, and laborers. Even though the community existed until the 1930s, it was overtaken by the growth of Brooklyn and almost forgotten amidst urban renewal plans of the 1950s, when many of its old buildings were replaced by newer structures. In 1968, subway engineer James Hurley and pilot Joseph Haynes rediscovered and worked to save 4 wooden cottages, now known as the Hunterfly Road houses. Those are now the only existing remnants of the 19th century Weeksville. The homes were threatened by demolition planned shortly after their discovery, but Joanne Marinard, the first executive director of the Weeksville Society, was successful in leading youth groups and members of the community in a campaign to preserve the houses. Weeksville achieved landmark status in 1971. In 2005, the 4 homes were finally restored and opened to the public. And so Weeksville, New York, one of the first so-called Black African-American newspapers, one of the largest so-called African-American communities in this time frame. Then I want to go into Brooklyn, Illinois. Yeah, I never heard of Brooklyn, Illinois either. Of 1823. In the early 1820s, 11 African-American families, some free, some fugitives, crossed the Mississippi River from the slave state of Missouri to the free states of Illinois to found the first Black town in the United States. The first Black town in the United States. Brooklyn, Illinois. According to oral traditions, the group was led by Priscilla and John Baltimore and included the Anderson, Civilian, Singleton, Wilson, Cox, Wyatt, and Carper families. Priscilla Baltimore had purchased her freedom from her master, a Methodist minister, saw to it that religious faith would be one of the guiding pillars of her new community. She also hoped the community would be a refuge for others fleeing slavery. Shortly after forming their new settlement, the townspeople were visited by Bishop William Paul Quinn, a missionary minister of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. Bishop Quinn, after meeting the families in the Baltimore homes, helped found the Brooklyn AME Church in 1825. In addition to its public role as a community church, Brooklyn AME, later called Quinn Chapel AME Church, became part of the network of AME churches that formed the Underground Railroads in in Illinois. Tunnels still exist under the building that at one point secreted fugitive slaves. The location of Brooklyn on the Mississippi River across from St. Louis, Missouri, helped its residents to become financially independent, providing opportunities for brick masons, carpentry, coopers, and boatmen. Nonetheless, the economic activities of African Americans in Illinois were restricted by the state's black laws enacted when the states joined the Union in 1819. I just did a video about the Union states adopting those black codes in 1865, the Black Code 1724, and the French Noir Black Codes of 1619. Again, all these tie in together. If you deal with these dates, you'll get the history of what took place, what was going on. If you haven't seen those videos, that's why it's important to go check them out, because all this stuff ties into each other. These laws restricted the occupations Blacks could pursue, virtually eliminated their civil rights, and controlled the entire entry of new Blacks into the states. Aiding runaway slaves was a felony under the codes. The authorities could expel any African Americans who could not maintain an income. Although first an all-Black community, by 1837, 5 white men moved to Brooklyn and platted land, which they sold to other incoming white settlers. They and the newcomers dominated the town politically, since African Americans in Illinois were not allowed to vote. Brooklyn was incorporated in 1873, but it wasn't until 13 years later that Black voters, as the majority of the local electorate, regained political control of the town. In 1891, they adopted the new name of Lovejoy after the murdered abolitionist Elijah J. Lovejoy, to distinguish it from the neighboring, mostly white town also called Brooklyn. So they had to separate themselves, so they renamed their town Lovejoy after this abolitionist who was murdered. They went by Lovejoy. Lovejoy did not enjoy much growth or prosperity in the 20th century, and it lost many of its residents. Today, however, long-term residents, with the help of University of Illinois archaeologists and historians, are attempting to restore the original town and publicize this remarkable story. And so we just dealt with Brooklyn, Illinois, and how this town had brick masons, carpentry, coopers, and boatsmen. And it also identified how the Black laws, or those Black codes, restricted them from certain things. Then we go into the New Philadelphia of Illinois in 1836. And so the New Philadelphia, Illinois is one of the most famous of the antebellum all-Black towns. Founded by Free Frank McWhorter of 1777 to 1854, a former Kentucky slave who purchased his freedom with his own earnings. New Philadelphia, Illinois was the first U.S. town to be registered by an African-American prior to the Civil War. Now covered by prairie farm fields, New Philadelphia was located across the Mississippi River from Hannibal, Missouri, amid a cluster of other Black settlements and pro-abolitionist Illinois towns. Frank McWhorter was born a slave in South Carolina. At the age of 18, moved with his owner into Kentucky. With labor in short supply in their new location, McWhorter was hired out to a neighboring farm, allowing him to prove his potential as a conscientious worker. When his master announced the plantation was again relocating, McWhorter negotiated a deal to remain in Kentucky, running the farming operation, saving wages, and eventually opening a saltpeter mine as a side business. He earned enough money to purchase his freedom along with that of another slave, his wife, Lucy, 1771 to 1870, for a total of $1,600. McWhorter later purchased the freedom of their firstborn son as well, 15 other family members. I can respect that. In 1930, he sold all of his Kentucky holdings and moved his family to Northwest Illinois. Under the 1832 Land Act, McWhorter purchased 42 acres of land in Hadley Township within Pike County, Illinois. He plated and legally registered the town, which he called New Philadelphia. Like other land promoters of that era, McWhorter sold parcels to Black and white pioneers. With his right to own property as a free Black in Illinois limited by the state statutes, McWhorter petitioned the great Illinois General Assembly using a legislative loophole, and by 1836, he and his son owned 600 acres in Hadley Township without restriction. So just giving you an example of this brother here, Frank McWhorter, who was born a slave, was the founder of New Philadelphia, Illinois, and how he freed his wife, freed his family, or paid for their freedom, and created this town. Now I want to go into Deer Lake Park, Deer Lake, Washington. Deer Lake Park, Deer Lake, Washington. Right? Deer Lake, Washington of 1910. It says, the spokesman review of March 6, 1910. And you see the photo, it's more of our people. So the spokesman review on March 6, 1910 featured this headline: Spokane, Negroes buy land tract to be developed by Black laborers only. The article continues, for the purpose of giving the Negroes of Spokane an opportunity to demonstrate a fitness to survive in the Northwest. A band of colored folks had organized a development company and bought 140 acres of land near Deer Lake, north of the city. Initially known as Deer Lake Project, the company's objectives were to operate the biggest and best orchards in Stevens County, to be both economical and profitable in their business undertaking, and to help defray expenses by growing truck gardens, vegetables between the trees. At least 45 stockholders from Spokane to Chicago invested $18,000 into the project. And also I want you to recognize or just notice how throughout these time frames, these articles, we were reclassified Black, Negro, African American, colored. I went over that already. And so you'll understand how they switch these labels from these different eras in law, these different labels that they placed on our people. Peter Burroughs Jr. and his brother Charles Burroughs were president and secretary of the company, respectively. Charles's daughter, Eleanor Chase, told historian Quintard Taylor, Uncle Peter homesteaded land across the lake from this orchid. It used to be called Burroughs Landing, and he built by himself 3 or 4 cabins. It was a resort for friends and other people who wanted to enjoy the lovely environment. Even though prospects were bright at first, the company existed only a few years and eventually had to curtail operations because of transportation and monetary problems. Well, I will say that it might have lasted 10 years. Eleanor Chase remembered, today Deer Lake is the site of Deer Lake Resort, still boasting the same lovely environment. And so just showing you that this place, Deer Lake, was founded by a brother or a group of Negroes of Spokane, invested in 45 stockholds or 45 acres for $18,000 to obtain this land. 1910. Then you have the Mound Bayous of 1887. And this is the Mound Bayou resident in front of a store in Mississippi in 1939. So Mound Bayou was in Mississippi, but it was founded in 1887. And this photo is a photo of a group of brothers in front of a store in 1939. And so it says Mound Bayou was an all-Black town in the Yazoo Delta in northwest Mississippi. It was founded during the spring of 1887 by 12 pioneers from Davis Bend, a fledgling Black colony impacted by falling agriculture prices, natural disasters, and hostile race relations. This migration movement was led by Isaiah Montgomery, former patriarch of Davis Bend, purchased from the Louisville, New Orleans, and Texas Railroad. Mound Bayou bordered a new rail line between Memphis, Tennessee, and Vicksburg from 1890 to 1915. Mounds Bayou was a land of promise for African Americans, encapsulated in this promise were self-help, race pride, economic opportunity, and social justice in a self-segregated community designed for Blacks to have minimum contact with whites until integration was a viable option to Black freedom. And so David Bend, Mississippi. Oh, this was a town. Davis Bend. This brother here, Isaiah Montgomery. Never know, he could be my people's. Never know. Share the same last name. Government name. The migration movement was led by Isaiah Montgomery. And so let's get deeper into it. Mound Bayou had a U.S. postal office, 6 churches, banks, stores, and several public and private schools. Its economy depended on the production of cotton, timber, and corn, and being an agent for the L, No, and T Railroad, which we went over those up in the top. Politically, Mound Bayou's mayor, Isaiah Montgomery, protected it from white violence through political accommodations. Montgomery also ensured Mound Bayou growth by working closely with Booker T. Washington after 1900 through his Lieutenant Charles Banks. Socially, Mound Bayou had an exceptionally low crime rate, high morals, no gambling or sale of alcohol, and everyone had to be useful members of the community. Through outlets with the town's newspaper, The Demonstrator, 1900, Mounds Bayou promoted education as an essential path to community survival, and particularly vacational education in scientific agriculture through the Mound Bayou Normal Industrial Institute from 1907 to 1915. This infrastructure, along with the Mound Bayou, functions as a railroad center, allowed it to flourish and grow to 8,000 people by 1911. Its noticeable decline occurred during the Great Migration period of 1915 and 1930, in which cotton prices fell, Booker T. Washington passed away, and the Black path towards freedom was redirected from independent towns towards the major cities to the United States. And so, again, why did Dr. King not want to rebuild these cities? Why did he want to push integration? Why did he want to push, let's get along with these people? He had a dream. Let's take a look at who Lieutenant Charles Banks was. This brother here was Booker T. Washington's lieutenant. This is a picture of him when he was 38 years old in 1911. Despite its sharp population decline throughout the century, Mounds Bayou still exists today as a predominantly Black town in Mississippi with a 98.6% total Black population. So this town still stands to this day. Next, we're going to go into Boley, Oklahoma. I'm going to go a little further into Oklahoma as we finish this video off, but I want to just touch on Boley, and then we'll go back to some other places, and then we're going to go back to Oklahoma's history. Boley, Oklahoma was established in 1903. And this is a photo of Boley, Oklahoma of April of 1922. And so in the early 20th century, Boley, Oklahoma was the largest predominantly Black town in the United States. Boley was officially opened for settlement in 1903 in Creek Nation, Indian Territory, along with Fort Smith and Western Railroads. The interracial group that founded Boley included Lake Moore, a white attorney, John Boley, a white manager for the Fort Smith and Western Railroad, and Thomas M. Haynes, a Black farmer and entrepreneur from Texas. The trio worked together with James Barnett, a Creek freedman, to purchase the land of Barnett's daughter, Abigail, to form Boley's nucleus. Southern migrants in search of better opportunities flocked to Boley, and the town experienced rapid growth over the years. In its prime, Boley was home to many businesses and institutions. There were numerous cotton gins and banks and schools, both public and private, several fraternal clubs, and churches of every denomination. Boley had a railroad depot, a post office, a telephone company, and a power plant. The municipality also successfully bid to most Oklahoma's main Black fraternal lodges, a Black tuberculosis hospital, and the state training school for Negro boys. All who visited Boley included Booker T. Washington, marveled at the ambition and Virgo of the townspeople. Upon Oklahoma statehood in 1907, the citizens of Boley, like all African Americans in Oklahoma, experienced major setback in their civil rights. Although the day-to-day effects of segregation were muted in Boley, most people in the town were disfranchised in 1910, when the grandfather clause became law. However, Boley was an important location for all Blacks in the states as they worked to fight disenfranchisement for the next 2 decades. In addition to political turmoil, the town also faced economical difficulties that plagued most small towns in the United States at the time. By the 1930s, Boley began to experience a sustained population decline. Today, Boley remains mostly Black and is home to many descendants of the town's original settlers. The towns host a popular rodeo every Memorial Day weekend when family, friends, and visitors flock to the community once again. And so Boley is recognized as the largest quote unquote black town or predominantly black town in the United States at the time. Now I want to go into, you had Brooksville, Oklahoma. Yeah, I wrote it down. Had to do my studies. But finna come give y'all nothing, I didn't know what I was talking about. So you had the Brooksville, Oklahoma, which was established in 1903 as well. And so a lot of these things, like I said, if you watch that last video I did with the Homestead Act, or the Boomer Sooner, the land rush of 1889, you will see a few years later, late 1800s, early 1900s, these black towns started to form in these places where this Homestead Act took place. It says one of Oklahoma's more than 50 all black towns. Brooksville is one of the only 13 still existing at the beginning of the 21st century. Located in Potawatomi County, 4 miles southwest of Tecumseh, Brooksville was established in 1903. Originally, the town was named Sewell after a white doctor who owned much of the surrounding land and who attended the residence. In 1912, the name changed to Brooksville in honor of the first African-American in the area, A.R. Brooks, a cotton buyer and farmer. His son, W.M. Brooks, became the first postmaker. In 1906, Reverend Jetson White organized St. John's Baptist Church. Soon afterward, the congregation built a church that still exists. White also promoted the town throughout the South, urging African Americans to settle there. Brooksville had a Santa Fe Railroad station, 3 hotels, 2 doctors, and 2 mills. In 1924, with the aid of the Rosenwald Fund, a new school was built. Banneker School, under the management of W.T. McKenzie, was a rock building in 4 large rooms, a 300-seat auditorium, a small library, and a well-equipped domestic science room. George W. McLaurin, the first African-American graduate student at the University of Oklahoma, taught at the school. After a fire, the original building was replaced by a wooden one that served students until the school closed in 1968. The building then became the community center for the town and stands next to the new city hall. A declining cotton market in the Great Depression made life difficult in Brooksville, as in many Oklahoma communities. Most of the residents departed, but the town survived and incorporated in October 1972, and the census reported population of 46 to 69 in 1960 and 1990, respectively. At the turn of the 21st century, Brooksville had 90 residents, but by 2010, the number of residents had dropped to 63. And also, if y'all want me to do a video on the Great Depression, leave a comment, because you see, a lot of these towns started falling during the 1930s with the Great Depression. And also, if you're familiar with the Social Security card, birth certificate, and what took place in the 1930s with the United States government, then yeah, like I said, if you want me to do a video on that, leave a comment. Now I want to go into what today is called Okfuskee counties. This is also in Oklahoma. In Okfuskee County lies one of the 50 original all-black towns. Clearview is one of the only 13 still existing. Okfuskee is Clearview. I should have said that. I didn't say that. Clearview was originally known as Lincoln. It was founded in 1903 when the Fort Smith and Western Railroads was created to go through parts of what at the time was known as Indian Territory. 3 men by the name of James A. Roper, Lemuel Jackson and John Grayson were responsible for plating the town site. Together, the three formed the Lincoln Town Site Company in an attempt to attract more settlers. A post office was officially established in the town on February 20th, 1904 as Lincoln Post Office, but was swiftly changed to Abe Lincoln Post Office. I'm saying that wrong, Abe Lincoln Post Office, with town founder John Grayson being the first postmaster. Just a month later, changed the name to revert it back to the Lincoln Post Office, noticing that Abe Lincoln was too long. Shortly after that, the town name morphed into Clearview. Dorothy Waller, who grew up in the town, says someone stood on top of one of the mountains, and when they looked down, they said, "There's a clear view." Thus, the name was born. Shortly after, the local paper that was named the Lincoln Tribune evolved into the Clearview Patriarch. The town quickly rose in the population and business, including a military company, a two-story hotel, a print shop, and around 1911, Roper and Jackson departed, and J.E. Thompson moved into Clearview. Also nearby, just go northeast, was a creek in Seminole Agriculture College. And again, it goes into the Great Depression, was when the downfall of Clearview started. So like I said, you want me to do a video on the Great Depression, let me know, and I'll do that. And then we have Langston, Oklahoma of 1890. Langston, Oklahoma is one of the few remaining Black towns located in the former Oklahoma Territory. The town, which opened for settlers on October 22nd, 1890, was named for John Marshall Langston, who took office as the first Black Virginian to serve the United States House of Representatives only 1 month earlier. And so I'm gonna speed this up a little bit, but as you see, Langston was named after John Langston. I'm sure many of you that attend Langston, they probably give y'all this history, they probably give y'all this information. If you've ever gone to Langston or attended Langston, you're familiar with the history, leave a comment, tell us a little bit about John Langston. Langston's principal founders were William L. Eagleson, a prominent newspaper editor, Edward P. McCabe, a former Kansas State auditor, and Charles W. Robinson, a white land speculator. Eagleson and McCabe had both been ardent supporters of Black migration of Oklahoma Territory, and through their efforts, the town's population was settled by Blacks from Kansas and several southern states. Taking on the role of chief promoter of Langston, McCabe encouraged only those Blacks with sufficient resources to support themselves to move to the town. Through his efforts, the town attracted an estimated 600 settlers by January 1891, with more Blacks settling in the surrounding rural areas. So this photo is an early class at Langston University. Like I said, I want to keep going because I got a lot in this one and I didn't know it was going to be this long. But I want y'all to get this information so you understand that there were melanated establishments, melanated cities. You had grocery stores, you had shoe stores, you had churches, you had movie theaters, you had farmers, you had doctors, you had physicians, you had mathematicians, you had universities, you had schools, laundromats, anything we needed that we say we don't have in our community today, we had these things in our communities. And so you have Lima, Oklahoma, also, which was founded in 1913. It was incorporated in 1913. Then you have Summit, Oklahoma, which was established in 1910. I'm finna just go through these real quick. This sister, Sarah Rector, I'm sure many of you have seen her picture before. Who is she? Where did she come from? Sarah Rector of 1902, 1967. Sarah Rector received international attention at the age of 11 when the Kansas City Star in 1913 publicized the headlines, "Millions to a Negro Girl." From that moment, Rector's life became a cauldron of misinformation, legal and financial maneuvering, and public speculations. Rector was born to Joseph and Rose Rector on March 3rd, 1902, in a two-room cabin near Twine, Oklahoma, on Muskogee Creek Indian Employment land. Both Joseph and Rosa had enslaved Creek ancestry. She's got Creek ancestry. Who are the real indigenous or real natives? We'll get into that later. Or I've already touched on that, but if you ain't figured it out yet, I'm trying to tell y'all, it's right here. And both their fathers fought the Union Army during the Civil War. When Oklahoma statehood became imminent in 1907, the Dawes Allotment Act divided Creek land among the Creek and their former slaves with a termination date of 1906. Rector's parents, Sarah Rector herself, her brother Joe Jr., and her sister Rebecca all received land. Land granted to former slaves are usually the rocky lands and poor agricultural quality. Rector's allotment of 160 acres was valued at $556. They played this system. But as you see, as I mentioned in that Boomer Sooner, I'm going to put that at the end of the video. Talks about the Dawes Act, the Dawes allotment, the $5 Indian. Let's keep going. Tatum, Oklahoma, 1890s. Is that right? Yeah, 1895. So yeah, by 1890s, after the enactment of the Dawes Severity Act of 1887, there's that Dawes Act again. Land spectaculars wooed blacks to this self-segregated and self-sufficient place. In Carter County, northwest of Ardmore, Lee and Mary Tatum founded the eponymous community surrounding their hotel and store. After applying for the post office, though never a large town, Tatum became an important center of rural Black life in the early 20th century. Using some funds from the Rosenwald Foundation, citizens built a large school in the 1920s, the same decade in which the silent movie Black Gold was filmed in town. A decade later, pretty boy Charles Floyd laid low in Tatum for a while too. Though the town is still incorporated, Tatum has lost a considerable amount of its population due to the economic downturns, and it didn't help that the town also never saw a railroad pass through either. Today, Tatum is just a little wayside stop along OK7. It's this history that merits this town a closer look. And so this town was destroyed. This town was a Black town, but it didn't get much. It didn't really flourish like it should have. Then we go into Tallahassee, 1850s. Tallahassee's Manual Labor Schools was a boarding school for Creek freedmen funded by the Creek Nations in the Indian Territory. And so again, a lot of quote unquote Black people have Creek in them. You are those original people. But if you look into the Dawes Act, the $5 Indian Act, the pen is mightier than the sword. And so they stripped you out, put this pale skin in, and now they're claiming to be Creek or natives, and you hollering you from Africa. See how they tricked you? The Tallahassee School was originally founded in 1850 at the first of 3 boarding schools for the education of children by the Creek Nation. The school was located at the confluence of the Arkansas and Verdigris River on the northeastern edge of Creek Nation and served as a premier educational institution among the Creeks for many years. And so, yeah, this year again, then you have Vernon, Oklahoma, which was established in 1911. And this is a photo of the Vernon Post Office in 1980. But just giving you a glimpse, a historical, something y'all can look into of these quote unquote all Black towns. As I asked in the beginning and I've asked throughout the video, why did Dr. King want to integrate us and not rebuild what was already in place, what our ancestors already had established for us? These are some of the towns in Oklahoma that I've already read, but I wanted to just show y'all a glimpse of some photos or some imagery on some maps. Of course, you have Booker T. Washington, and it says he proclaimed it the most enterprising and in many ways the most interesting of the Negro towns in the United States. Old Farmers and Merchants Bank in Boley, Oklahoma. So this is an old bank in Boley, Oklahoma. I'm sure many of you know this sister. This is the sister from the 1921 massacre. Rest in peace to that sister. Like I say, you have Brooksville, Oklahoma. George W. McLaren. Clearview, Oklahoma. This is brother President Dr. Donnie Nero of the Oklahoma African American Educators Hall of Fame. Grayson, Oklahoma. Grayson Town Hall. IXL, Oklahoma. Never heard of it, but 4 sections of them called Creek Freedman Anointment. So this is another all Black town, quote unquote Black town. Langston, Oklahoma, we just went over that. John Mercer Langston statue at Langston University. Lima, Oklahoma. You had Redbird, Oklahoma, located in Wagner County. Washington High School in 1919. So Redbird was grand opened in 1907. Ward 600 attended the grand opening in 1607. The post office was official in 1902. Redbird, Oklahoma. Many of you have heard of Renniersville, Oklahoma, 1903. And so again, you had the Oklahoma Land Rush, 1889, and a lot of the slaves, free Blacks and slaves bought their freedom and moved to these lands and created, quote unquote, as we call them, Black towns. Sure you guys are familiar with John Hope Franklin. So Renniersville, Oklahoma, John Hope Franklin. My challenge was to weave it into the fabric of the American history enough of the presence of Blacks so that the story of the United States could be told adequately and fairly. John Hope Franklin. Summit, Oklahoma. I went over that. Taft, Oklahoma, again, 1902. Lely Fowler Davis. This was the nation's first Black mayor, 1973. And so just giving y'all a history of these quote unquote Black towns that were already in existence prior to 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, and so thus after. And I ask again, why did Dr. King Mill was born in 1929. So I'm pretty sure in his schools, They taught this little, because this is 1916, so this was just 13 years before you were born. So I'm sure he knew some knowledge of his history. Why did he not want to promote the reconstruction of these towns? Why did he want to promote integrating? What did integrating do for us? Vernon, Oklahoma. Then you have a list of all Black towns that no longer exist. Bailey, Bogey Bend, Booker T, Chase, Cimarron, Clarksville, Douglas, and Garfield County. Then you had a Douglas in Oklahoma County. Emmanuel, Ferguson, Foreman, Gibson Station, Homer, Huntsville, Iconium, Key West, Lee, Louisville, Liberty, Mabel, Macedonia, Melvin, Oberlin, Pleasant Valley, Renty, Sanders, Eudora, Wiley, Wybark, Yahola, Zion. These were actual places that just no longer exist. And so I want to say again, I appreciate y'all taking out your time, checking this video out. Peace and love, family.